Joining us on Bottom Line this week are Jim Guido, the Vice President for North State Technology Solutions, and Jim Dickinson, a partner with the law firm of Smith Anderson. Thank you both for being with us this week on Bottom Line. Well, let's start with a little conversation about who you are and your background. Jim, lead us off.
Sure. As you mentioned, I'm a Vice President with North State Technology Solutions, a company headquartered in High Point, North Carolina. We're focused on cybersecurity solutions for the marketplace and the customers that we serve, and we also provide data center solutions and networking solutions to complement what we do in cybersecurity.
Joe, what is your legal practice in this regard?
So, Joe Dickinson, partner with Smith Anderson. I'm the practice lead for our data use privacy security group. And the majority of my practice really is focusing on helping clients understand that the majority of this risk comes before you have the breach, and how do you best position yourself to minimize the liability and the potential risks before something bad happens.
Well, we've seen a lot in the news lately about large-scale hacks of data. We've heard a lot about Russians hacking into the American electoral system. What are some of the major challenges we face? Is North Carolina, is the business community here particularly susceptible?
Well, that's a great question. As we see more and more businesses start up or move and expand to North Carolina, it gives us more and more of a reason to be a bigger target, especially as we look at the financial market, the healthcare market here in North Carolina. So there are some pretty large targets here. And obviously the folks who are after important data or data of value are going to chase those targets. Now, we've seen also with ransomware and other types of attacks where it even transcends the business and moves on into folks and their personal lives and can affect them there as well. But we certainly have some fairly large targets here in North Carolina.
And it's probably this question goes to Joe as well. It seems like all these cyber attacks happens on companies that have a massive customer base. So at least most of them, if you look at it in recent past, that is. So it really does. Why should a small business or a medium-sized business care?
Great question. And one of the things that we see is that it's really those smaller businesses that are the primary focus, because the bad guys want to use access through those smaller businesses who typically don't have robust cyber programs to get to the big dollar companies where the really valuable data is.
So that's the entry point.
Yes.
To get to the bigger guys.
Yes. Because for budget reasons, and oftentimes those clients think that because we're a small company, no one is going to pay attention to the data that we have or to our cyber risk, when the opposite's true. They're the sort of the low-hanging fruit that the bad guys will focus on to get to the data at the large medical.
So when that happens, let's take, there are two examples. Let's take Equifax, that we all know what happened just a few days ago. If personal data is compromised because of the breach at Equifax, as a lawyer, I mean, who is liable? What is the liability? Walk us through the process.
Wow, that's probably a full
whole
day,
show.
a whole show. Part of the problem with Equifax for me is we don't yet know technically what went wrong. So we don't know how their system was compromised. So was it one of their vendors? Was it a material gap in their security program? So who really dropped the ball? We don't yet know that. But to answer your question, from a regulation standpoint, one of the things that we find is that a lot of businesses don't realize that they already have a legal obligation to assess how they process data, where the data comes into their organization, what they do with it after they get the data, and where they send it. And so if, as part of that data flow, your organization did not have good safeguards in place, the liability could land in more than one place.
And we talked a little bit about the bad guys, but who are the bad guys here? I think there's a lot of preconceived notions about who's responsible for this, but is there a profile, or is there one way to describe who the probable attackers are?
So look to your left, look to your right. That's what the bad guy looks like. It's everybody anymore. And I'm sure Jim can speak more to where the technology is coming from, but we're seeing the technology still being developed primarily in Eastern European, Russian, and Chinese organizations, but they then make that technology available on the darknet, and so somebody in Raleigh can access that and use it from their basement in Raleigh.
It seems like you're always chasing the solution. Does it feel like that? I mean, it's almost, they're always one step ahead. Yes?
Well, it does seem that way, and it's much like a military exercise. It is a measure, countermeasure process. And so when the commercial businesses come up with a good solution, well, obviously those who are out there to hack and do things that are nefarious are going to find a way around that control. They're going to find some way to overcome that either technical or social control to go ahead and perform the activities that they're trying to perform. And so it's a constant leapfrog. That's why it's cybersecurity is a process, not a point in time. And that's where a lot of companies and individuals make a mistake in their planning and think that we have done certain things and now we're secure. No, it's that we continue to do things that keep us secure, but we also are prepared to respond when something happens, because it will.
See, and that's probably the biggest problem for the small and medium-sized businesses, because it is becoming more and more expensive for them. So from what you just said, the solution is to sort of budget more to make sure that it's not a one-and-done kind of deal. It's a continuous, and that takes money. And when you're running 3 or 4% margins on your P&L, something has to go. And see, the risk from what Joe said is if they become the entry point, that pretty much will done with their business eventually, especially to that big vendor who knows now that it came through this one of my smaller guys. I don't want to do business with him anymore, and that sort of ruins your business.
And it can, and oftentimes businesses are frustrated, especially small business, because if you think about the number of laws and regulations that in theory could apply, it's overwhelming. And so what we try to tell folks is find some of the common ground. There are a lot of common denominators, regardless of which legal requirement or which regulation you're talking about. Focus on the common requirements and do something, because if you just throw up your hands out of frustration and you don't implement a robust program, then it's what we refer to as being a victim twice. You're a victim when you're hacked, but then you're potentially a victim again when a regulatory agency looks at you and says, here's your fine because you didn't have an adequate security program in place.
Well, as we think about what policies that elected officials or governmental officials could enact to help companies protect themselves from these sorts of attacks, what are your thoughts? What are the things that those folks need to understand better about this peril?
Well, from my experience, certainly having more awareness in state and local government, even federal government, is very important. However, I think one of the breakdowns can be that by the time the federal government, as an example, puts in place a new requirement, something new that's now a standard for business, it will be probably a couple of years before that trickles down into what is actionable to a business. By the time that happens, many of those measures that are required are now dated from a protection, cybersecurity, and an awareness perspective. And so being current, being nimble is very important. And being able to execute against those things quickly is very important. Even some of the standards that we see out there today around compliance, they're requiring companies to do things that are dated from a technological perspective.
Gentlemen, thank you for joining us on Bottom Line this week. A very interesting topic.